Hello, my name is fꜷlty, and although I've been making lore theory videos for about 9 months now, and blogs since 2023, I've never really had the chance to talk about others' theories, especially in a way that's not merely, this is wrong or right. So, today I've picked out some of the most obscure theories I've found and think this is the perfect way to discuss them, while not needing to make full-on videos for each. I just want to analyze them and consider each implications, strengths, and, yes, also flaws, without necessarily endorsing nor denying them. Please grab a chair, sit back, no chewing gum in the blasted classroom, because today I want to explore some theories other people have posited rather than another one of my own. On that, let's begin. fꜷlty has made Herobrine. This is the surface level, so I'm not sure what you're expecting other than these kind of theories that are widespread but often unappreciated by more leptomophilic lorists. Especially before, a lot of people thought that the ancient builders were a constructed creation, kind of like a golem from the fꜷlty. This was based off the idea that the totems of undying have some power over death, and that the wool rooms were great evidence of their attempts. The idea is then broadened. The fꜷlty were dissatisfied by the ancient builders they made, and that's why they hunt players, where Herobrine is kind of their magnum opus, that one non-failed attempt whom they love. There does seem to be an odd appreciation for pumpkins in the woodland mansions, and the pillager outposts show us dummies that could arguably be attempts at golems, but all in all, I think this is one of the weakest theories I've seen, and I could devote a whole video to it, but this'll do for now. Archhaven Peninsula. Once you load into the Archhaven level in Minecraft Dungeons, you'll find an ambush, and thereafter a little dock. If you go off the intended path, however, to the left, you'll find a very weird bunch of connected bridges between islands, leading to a slightly larger piece of land with 4 pillars and an ambush pillar, alongside some minuscule other structures on the edge. I have really no idea what this is supposed to be. It looks like it could have been a mining camp, but there's no dig site nor other tools or whatever else thing you'd expect from a bunch of testificate miners. I only assumed the developers were planning on making something more but couldn't and just added this random ambush and chest, or were maybe trying to make the short level a bit longer, but that's weird since this isn't on the main path and most people probably just skip it. Creeper statues. In the Creeper Woods level of Minecraft Dungeons especially, but also in other levels, the player can find really weird statues of creepers. These aren't perfect replicae either, they look like spikes that have just been stacked up with facades chiseled in. They look a lot like the pillars geomancers summon and can be found in a plethora of levels, including those that also harbour those fꜷlty. It's possible these were made by some creeper worshipping religion, but more than that, I reckon these are merely warnings to anyone considering to travel. The danger pottery shirt shows us the mobs are considered deadly in the canon, and these are likely just extensions of that. The fourth host theory. In Minecraft Legends, we are introduced to the hosts, which are kind of like the villagers' version of Greek or Roman myths. Here we have action, knowledge, and foresight, but this theory posits that there was a fourth host at one point, taking evidence from both the square shape of the table, which could make more sense as a triangle, and the host's eyes, where action has 1, knowledge has 2, and foresight has 4, as if to imply that there's a missing character who should have 3 eyes. There's more evidence of this idea making sense, and the figure most often called out as a good filler of this role is Ender from Dungeons, who has 3 eyes on his main visage and multiple powers that seem close-like to the hosts. The theory generally goes that Ender was an ethereal being like the others, but had some Luciferial-style fall and was forced to take power in the end, whence he began to plot against the hosts and, by extension, the overworld that they loved. This is a theory that I've considered a lot, and I love the Miltonic elements, but I don't really think this iceberg is a good place to explain exactly how I feel in detail. It would be nice to have a full video's time to explain everything. I had a script for it all written actually, but never ended up completing the visuals and voicing because I want to wait a while before I make a permanent stance. It would have been a semi-sequel to my Drowns theory though. The Nether is hell. Back in the earlier days of Minecraft, especially when it was still under Notch, there was the idea that the Nether was supposed to be a somewhat literal representation of hell. It does seem somewhat sensible to draw parallels between the pre-1.16 Nether and the old fiery pit, but especially after the Nether update, I think it stops making sense. Even back then, the player had the ability to respawn, and it was otherwise unevidential to assume that any villagers that died were sucked down there into soul sand or whatever else thing. So it makes sense on a superficial sense, with netherrack that looks almost fleshy and oceans of lava, but in the actual lore it makes no sense, and Mojang seem to be moving away from this idea now. There are other games that portray hell in ways better than I imagine Minecraft possibly could, though I don't think I've seen a sandbox. Would that even be fun to play, though? I feel like it could only possibly be a sanguine recoloring of a normal sandbox with some Halloweeny racta. Enderlings play normal mobs roles. If you've ever stopped to listen to the sound effects of the Enderling mobs in Minecraft Dungeons, you'll find that a lot of them sound like static-filled versions of normal mobs audio. We already know that the End is trying to turn the overworld into a second End, so this asks if the End's mobs are possibly just warped versions of the overworld's creatures, kind of like how I argued the Creaking could be. This does lead back to a very uncomforting question. Does this mean that Endermen could actually be heroes, ancient builders, changed by the Void's magic? They do speak backwards English, so it makes sense if we judge them off their sounds. No, I don't think it works on the timeline at all. We don't know enough about the Enderlings to say much for certain, but there's no evidence to suggest these void creatures were made from overworlders any more than there is to suggest they were merely inspired by them. There's just too little evidence for anything to be certainly true, and a good bit of evidence against the heroes are Endermen theory elsewise. Heroes are angels. There's this one theory that I thought was pretty well known, same while well despised, but it turns out that very few of my colleagues actually knew this one, so I'll mention it here. In Minecraft Dungeons' final level, the Obsidian Pinnacle, we see the heroes fight until we actually get to defeat the main enemy, Archie in the Heart of Ender. This theory posits, however, that the heroes in the end aren't actually the builder race we know, and rather are angels come to bring Archie to heaven after he dies during the fight. It cites that the otherwise cloudy sky has this celestial beam of light coming down as if to lead the angels and Archie up, and that the Artilager ought to have died, and this is just a thematic and rating appropriate way to show that. I think this theory is absolutely amazing aesthetic-wise. It's cool. However, it fails at actually standing up to any critical analysis, and I want to clear it up. The four canonical heroes in Minecraft Dungeons fight all the way through the mainland to reach the diminutive villager and wreak a lot of havoc to get him, which I don't think an angel would be forced to do if its mission were godly. Alternatively, it's a fallen angel. Then there's the conflict of styles in the game's storytelling. Assuming this theory is true, it would conflict with the very literal nature of Minecraft Dungeons' lore. If something in that game is shown, it's actually there and actually canon, according to the developers, but this metaphorical, allegorical, synoletical guess assumes that that very literal approach is shared for this one moment, when we suddenly assume that canon becomes a parody of itself, like in Legends. Basically, if Archie isn't shown to die, then he's almost certainly still alive. There's no reason to assume that heroes are angels, and it would make very little sense if they were. When theorizing, I always try to apply the philosophy of Occam's razor, where I assume the most logical path with the fewest jumps is generally the one reality will likewise assume. This heroes are angels theory is one of the great examples of why this is a good and faithful conviction to hold. Pumpkins have souls. This is one of the most popular theories I've seen, so it probably wouldn't qualify to be on this listing, except for the fact I really like this one. I'm not sure if I agree with it, since there's arguably not a lot of evidence, however there is still a fair bit, and it seems rather foolproof in that. The idea is that pumpkins are used to make golems, and that because the pumpkins must be applied last before life is given to the creature, they must have some special anima in them, a soul. It doesn't affect much in the grander scheme of lore as a whole, but it's fascinating to consider, especially with some of the armor in Minecraft Dungeons. Axolotls are wardens. I can't believe it, but the day before I wrote this segment for the video, you're watching my Discord started chatting all about this one. Now I feel like it looks like I'm stealing their ideas, despite having noted this one as a good discussion point far prior-like. Anyway, this one is also pretty popular, like the last. Axolotls are blind, cave-dwelling creatures that are most famously this pinkish color. This theory is more concerned with what happens upon the inversion of this mob's coloration, though when, upon such, its colors grow rather more skulky. Mojang were the main perpetrators of this idea. They posted notes in Standard Galactic saying that the axolotls were not what they seemed to be, and there's official art that shows these weird forms. I think this is a ridiculous theory, personally. Plenty of creatures can be blind underground without being connected to Minecraft's edgiest biome. Just kidding, though, I actually adore the design and lore of the Deep Dark. Still, though, this one seems like lore bait with no real substance behind it. The Corrupted Tree. Anyone who has played the final DLC for Minecraft Dungeons knows that there's a lot more fauna in the end than in the base game, but maybe you've not noticed the scale of it all. The end has one particularly large tree, made likely of chorus wood, which died previously and is now the perfect home for more smaller trees to start growing off its base. This is unsubstantial, save for the fact we kind of see it in the Jungle Awakens free levels giant tree as well. This is less a theory and more just a tidbit I found interesting, but it seems like this tree was made so large not just for gameplay purposes, but actually by the Orb of Dominance's shard that fell onto the island. We see a bunch of purple ooze in the tree, just like we see void liquid in the ends, just like we see it in the whispers in Abomination. Like I said, not a theory, but a cool tidbit that otherwise wouldn't warrant a full video. Level mantras. During the introduction cutscene of almost every level in Dungeons, there's an odd leitmotif that plays, hummed often by some testificate group. These were something I wanted to discuss a long time ago in a blog for Planet Minecraft, alongside the music of the game and most of all the books, where I wanted to infer what was diegetic by figuring out what sorts of sounds were consistently described in these novels. I never posted that blog for obvious reasons. I didn't even finish writing it, as it was a romantic attempt to find lore from non-canonical sources and relied very heavily on a sort of inferential logic that even younger I could see was a bad base for a theory. The most interesting bit was, however, my writing on how these mantras may be useful in determining what is and is not actually canonically noisy. Especially with the narrator's voice playing alongside these songs, it raises questions as to which parts of the game's audio can be considered. This was back when I still used Times New Roman. Perpetual daylight theory. Another one I wanted to discuss is one I've mentioned briefly in my previous video concerning the Nameless One. Simply, this theory boils down to asking whether or not the fact that Minecraft Legends has two suns is canon. In Legends, the night only comes about by happening of the Orb of Dominance, and the yes argument for this theory is that this is a very literal retelling, despite Legends' often parodic-like version of the canon, where the no argument is then that the night and moon were always there, and that the game is just missaying the story. I have believed before that the night didn't exist before Legends, and I'm inclined to believe it still. I don't see why such a major event would be made up, nor what could possibly have been similar enough to get this warped into the story told tale style. Idyllic Galactic. Yet another that I've wanted to discuss for ages, though this one already saw that discussion. Idyllic Galactic is the name I gave to this supposed villager language seen within the announced trailer of Minecraft Legends. It's found only in said trailer and is one of the most obscure languages in the game, yet undeciphered. The name is one of my own manufacturing, so don't take it as official, though it's the best name I've found and works with the other scientific conventions of naming from the High Block Arch Education Committee. There are 45 letters in this language, which is over double that of the ISO basic Latin alphabet, so I question if there are some singular graphemes, letters, representative of English digraphs such as TH or SH. No one really knows. Return of the Piglins was meant to be canon. Although Matt Forbeck's other book, Return of the Archillager, is popular, his other book, Return of the Piglins, did not perform nearly as well. At least, I didn't enjoy it. One major reason for this was how basically useless it was, outside of just being a mediocre piece of literature, especially concerning its ineptitude for loring. Pretty much everyone knows that this book is not canon. However, it was actually written with the intention of being canon and had that honor stripped last minute before release. This makes one wonder if it could be used as a semi-accurate book with some aspects of canon still in it, but those are murky waters and no one can quite know what is canon and what is not. I assume that it's just because the book was supposed to be a funner, lighter one. Rise of the Archillager is not as much, and Mojang clearly had a more guiding hand in its writing, which gave them control over what small canon details to include. Creepers are robot spies. Here's a whack job of a theory, but one that I actually used to humor. The idea is somewhat complicated, but audio nonetheless. Creepers drop music discs when killed, but only when by a skeleton, and also hide under the cover of darkness despite not burning. That, combined with the fact that they explode near the player, leads some people to believe that the discs the mobs carry are actually intelligence against us to the enemy faction. This theory presumes that two hero clans were at war with each other, which is a very valid theory, so don't fall for this fallacy akin fallacy. We players are from the other faction than the Skellies, and thus do not have access to the discs, and the creepers exploding near us is them trying to destroy the evidence upon capture, while also maximizing destruction against their enemy side. I can't really say what makes this theory false in one big swing, it's just wrong. The idea that skeletons are from one side of the conflict, and that maybe zombies are from another, and that the player is one of the zombies' race is absurd enough, plus books such as the Bestiary, which are used as this theory's biggest source of evidence, are not canon anymore anyway. Story mode is a multiverse. It has been argued that story mode is canon, and well, this argument is generally crushed very quickly. Zatrix, a YouTuber fellow of mine, actually made one now-renounced theory concerning the idea that story mode actually was canon.
I think it seems like not real. I don't know a lot about world building.
But only within its own universe that connects multiversely to the base world. This was his explanation as to how YouTubers could enter into the story mode universe from the real world. Maybe the Minecraft movie is canon then too. This is a more ridiculous theory, forgive me for saying it. Mojang have been saying that the lore of Minecraft is very much whatever one's individual world might suggest it is, and this is similar, but even that doesn't work on a multiversal scale. Minecraft is canonically updated. Why can't you use copper for a beacon? This theory suggests that the reason is simply because beacons were invented before copper and without copper in mind during development by the heroes. Basically, we, the player, are watching Minecraft get updated in real time, and the heroes saw the same, and that's why, say, Netherite isn't in the ancient cities, despite the heroes having obviously gone to the Nether to get to the end. They went to the old Nether. I think, oh viewer, that you already know why this is not the case, but if not, it is important to remember that Minecraft lore is occasionally retconned, and sometimes stuff is also just added as a placeholder. Common ancestor theory. In biology, a pretty standard belief is in that of a Luca, that is the last universal common ancestor. Simply, this is the source of all life. You get whatever to split genetically, and then you have two species, and then they split and you have more, and so on and so forth. This theory very often refers specially to testificate mobs, which, if you haven't been able to tell yet, is a useful umbrella term I employ for villagerial creatures, such as merchants, witches, villagers, and obviously illagers. I don't know who invented it. So, what's the common ancestor to these? Not even the proper Luca of all life, but just this group specially? Generally, people say villagers, which makes sense. It's interesting to see which mobs could have come from which, or imagine what the commonmost animal would be whence each modern one would have come. I actually agree with this theory, but I don't think we as the lorist community have enough evidence to, beyond that, say what the Luca was or how similar certain mobs are to each other, such as heroes or villagers. Otherwise, it's a good theory. The hosts are Gnostic demiurges. This theory is very, very weird, but also fascinating and possibly more grounded than some. Basically, the idea is that the hosts from Legends are not the most powerful beings, rather being secondary under higher creatures. The hosts didn't create the overworld, and they seem to have a surprisingly limited skill set of powers, so I wonder if it is possible that they are simply minions to another and just don't reveal that to the hero so as to pridefully keep their glory. It's a cool idea. Maybe they aren't hiding it for Reaper fanatic reasons, but in the end, I can actually get behind the idea that there is something above the hosts. That's assuming they are real, however, which is also up for debate. Cave Sound Story. Finally, on our list, I'd like to discuss this theory, which suggests that the cave sounds, when played in numerical order, create an actual story in the lore. This doesn't work. This theory assumes that there are single pinpointable moments where personal storylines take place in the base game. That's not the case. Only in Legends and Dungeons does that work. I'm getting tired. The idea is that there was this guy in a minecart who ended up getting hit by a creeper's blast, and then his minecart falls down and he dies. I'm not going to play each sound one by one and explain what they mean, but will link in the description a video that does. Though know that this is what the supposed creeper explosion sounds like, so yeah. Okay, jokes aside, tell me what you thought of this video in the comments and what crazy theories you've seen yourself. Please consider subscribing if you like this video and hype it, but otherwise, I really only ask that you keep looking at these ideas, keep reevaluating yourselves, and no matter what, always remember to keep on luring, because I'll see you next time. Bye.